I'd like to introduce you to Martin and welcome to this DLTV webinar. This is part of a series of webinars we've been running as part of DLTV for last term. If you go onto the website, you'll see there's been a fantastic series of webinars, and we've got some more coming along next week and the week after, so it's a very exciting time. Go onto the DLTV website and you'll see them all, or you can subscribe to the DLTV newsletter and you'll get all of that information. Looks like we've got a whole lot of people joining us from a whole range of different areas. So Martin is content manager at the ESA. He's had a vast range of experience as a teacher, educational consultant, and worked for a time there at the Department of Education, which we didn't actually overlap, Martin, although we both did work there for a little while. But Martin's going to work us through what I think is one of the best resources you can go to if you're looking for resources for your students, for your leaders at your school, for your families at your school. There's some fantastic areas and information there. So welcome to the chat. Just a reminder that it is actually being recorded, and in about 10 days you'll be able to see yourself cooking a cake if you haven't turned your video off. Okay, so thank you, Martin. Over to you.
All right, thanks, Daryl. I'd just like to start off by acknowledging traditional owners of the land on which I live, which is the Bunurong people, and I pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. I wanted to start just with this webinar to say what my intention is, and really I'd like you to gain some strategies to locate resources on the DT Hub. It's quite a big site, and had some feedback from teachers because it's getting so big now it's hard to find things. So trying to give you some strategies to be able to locate the really great resources. And I'm going to talk through our learning design. I think it'll be really important to sort of just get your head around what that learning design is, and you might have already used some of these lesson plans, so that'll make sense to you. I'm going to be talking about connecting the lessons to students' interest and real-world connections. And if I've got time at the end, we'll talk about how to adapt some of these lessons for remote learning, which obviously in Victoria, this is what's happening at the moment. And one last thing is any more things that don't fit on that slide, I'll cover as well, but let's get into it. One of my good colleagues, Anna Canane, she basically gave me this bit of a construct, you know, as a teacher. What do I need to teach? How do I teach it? And then how do I know what my students have learned? And I'm going to use a bit of that process today through my journey through the Digital Technologies Hub, so you can get a bit of a sense of some, you know, signposting and look at some of these areas. So I'm pretty sure these are the things that you deal with every day, and you know, let's apply that to our digital technology. So what do I need to teach at the start? If you're coming from Victoria, of course, you've got the Victorian curriculum. There are other people though across for our digital technologies as for Australian curriculum as well. So I've put in here the jurisdiction and sector considerations. Obviously we've got Victoria, and I'm going to have a look at the Victorian curriculum, which today, you know, focusing on what to teach. So imagine you've looked up the Victorian curriculum, you looked at the guidelines, the student achievement standard, and you know where to from there. So looking at that, I'm going to sort of start off by saying, let's just take algorithms for example. So in the VCAA, the learning in digital technologies talks about the different areas for digital technologies, how it's grouped, and algorithms is grouped there. You can see with specifications and development of problem solving, and they're all linked together. So if you went on the Australian curriculum site, James Curran unpacks 10 key concepts. You know, if you want to find out more about some of those key concepts, I would suggest to have a look at that section of the Digital Technologies Hub. Again, what I've done with this presentation, I've put links in. So if you're interested in this, you can go straight to it and find out where it is. And then that unpacking the curriculum by the ACA, I found that really useful, and of course a lot of other teachers have found that useful to look at those key concepts and to see, what does it actually mean to a teacher, and what does a student look like they're doing in that each one of those concepts. So I would recommend, if you wanted to do a bit more about knowing about the curriculum, they're two fantastic areas. I'm going to just take you into this topics hub, this topics page on the hub, and here we go. It's open a couple of times. So where that is, you can see we've got topics, we've got artificial intelligence, algorithms, binary, computational thinking, a whole range of topics, but I'm just going to show you, use algorithms as the example. You can apply that if you want to look at binary or anything else, but it talks about, in pretty simple terms, what is it, an algorithm? So the starting point is there. Now we've got some resources to learn about algorithms. So you can see James Curran there again, some of those resources that I mentioned. We've got an intro to algorithms. We've got a range of resources. The videos down the bottom are more for secondary. So, if you've got a secondary classroom and you were looking at doing some work on algorithms, I'd really recommend those two videos. They step through algorithms in really good detail. But I'm probably wanted to show you some of the lesson plans we've got. And I think when you see them, it'll get a sense of what they're about. If you're in F2 teaching, obviously if you're doing algorithms, BBots are probably the starting point or the go-to place to include those. So if you're doing directional language, a lot of schools are doing BBots. I'm not going to go too much into using those. In our introducing algorithms lesson, you can see there for year about 3-4, they were looking at algorithms that are, tying up your shoelaces, boiling egg, making a pancake, making a jam sandwich, those sorts of things, just to introduce an algorithm and how it works. I wanted to show you this one here. Take a Lego lesson, and what that is shows teachers how to put together a lesson, how to construct or how to create an algorithm between two students to put together a Lego vehicle or whatever it might be, a toy. And the students then would follow, so one would be the person who creates the algorithm or explains it, and the other person has to follow how to make that toy. So, basically they both they swap over and take turns at building it. Then there's some variations that we suggest in terms of you can add a time once they've done it once. Also, you can talk through some strategies. So did the students just pull out bits and pieces and try and add it together, or did they organise the Lego building blocks together in some sort of way before they started doing their algorithm? So, of course, they're following the instructions, the instruction book, to explain to their person, their partner, how to build this. So what really comes into this is technical language, a red block, 2x4, those sorts of things. So it's a good one to try for that sort of thing. So that was our, let's go back. That was our topics page, and I'd recommend having a look through there at some of the lesson plans. The other way you could do that is to we could do a search as well. And what you'll find is our lessons are obviously targeted. Algorithms come through after 2, 3, 4, year 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, 10. So it progresses through the curriculum. So you can see there, follow, describe, and represent a sequence of steps. That's F2. What changes between F2 and 3, 4 is we're looking more at sort of adding a sequence of steps and decisions. And then 5, 6, we're branching and iteration. So then we move into design algorithms and represent diagrammatically in English. Let's just go back back into our algorithms, because I wanted to show you also, so we've got our secondary resources. So you can see on this side here, we've got the secondary resources. So in this getting warmer, one of the interesting things here is we're using a scaffold where we've got, this is for guessing a number between 0 and 100. So we're going to use a flow chart. So we've provided the students with the flow chart application or the actions, and they've got to put that together to try and work out how to do, you know, how to make the algorithm to do that. So again, there's plenty of different lesson plans we've got and that we cover. So what I tend to do is have a look at our topics page first, see what's there, and that's a really good starting point. As I mentioned, so algorithms, we've got our scope and sequence. So I'd imagine you've had a look at the scope and sequence. If I'm looking at, for primary, F to 2, what it does provide is, you know, let's say you've done BBOTs and you're not sure really where to go from there or what to do. You know, this provides a whole sequence from looking at following instructions. So we provide some information about what that's about, and then a whole range of resources. So with some assessment resources as well. So this fairy tale fun down the bottom, it's to do with assessment. So we're using a familiar fairy tale, and then the students need to order or sequence that those particular instructions to create their algorithm. So I would recommend to have a look at the scope and sequence. You can see here, as part of the sequence, we've got instructing the robot. So we've got a lot of BBOT type lessons there, which you can do that. So that's at years F to 2, but we can also go into, I just want to show you, say 3, 4, for example, and where that might fit in. So intro to programming. So one of the things would be useful to have a look at is this topic unit map. So what that allows us to do is visually look at, I'll just show you here. So it shows visually what the curriculum sort of looks like. So you can see here we've got developing simple solutions as visual programs. We've got define simple problems. And where's our algorithms? There we go. So it was define simple problems. And you can see here, we've got it divided up into user input, sequence branching. So it gives you a bit of a visual about what the curriculum looks like. And Paula Christopherson did that sort of work for us. So people have found that quite useful. And each sequence has got a scope and sequence, has got a solo taxonomy. So it will help you with like a rubric of how to assess students. So that's for each scope and sequence has that information there. So the first way I mentioned is to sort of look at what's in the topics page, and now you've got scope and sequence to have a look at there. So I'm just going to show you the year 7 and 8 version, and in terms of looking at algorithms, we've got that as part of creating an app or game. And in terms of designing a solution, we talk about, you know, we give a bit of an example about what's this about. So it looks at flow charts, but also then brings in pseudocode. So that's, I think, another thing to sort of realise that we're sort of progressing through the curriculum. And at year 7 and 8, flow chart, we can talk about being diagrammatically interpreting our algorithm, but then we move into pseudocode. So we sort of need to look at that in terms of our entry into visual programming, general purpose programming. And that's it's a good step. So we've got some information about how that's done. So one thing I wanted to do is just to mention, if you're doing some game app and or some app development, this paper prototyping, this is a really good resource to explain how to do some prototyping with, looking at user design, and sort of incorporates your design with your developing of your algorithms. So worthwhile to have a look at that. And also this one here, using paper prototyping using Office 365's apps. So again, some really good information there you can sort of use. And let's just go back to our PowerPoint. So you'll notice I mentioned before about the algorithms. So looking at flowcharts, looking at pseudocode, and then that's a step towards doing our general purpose programming. So I just want to show you this lesson here, how we might deal with in a secondary classroom. So that this is a computer program. So these set of lessons here are, we're looking at visual to text coding. So taking students from, say, doing visual programming maybe with Scratch, and then how do we move those students on into doing our general purpose programming. So there's a whole raft of lessons. This is one of them, but if you go into this section here, it's basically, we have an index here, an index page, and the index page has all the lessons. So it's set up really so that you could, as a teacher, go through the basics with your students, but feel comfortable that you know what you're doing in terms of the lessons. They're all staged, and you'll see there we've got lessons with branching and data type. So it says what the outcomes are, and it's all really well put together in terms of video tutorials and little code snippets. So if you were interested in trying to skill yourself up in terms of some programming for years 7, 8, I'd really recommend going and have a look at that set of lessons. As I was mentioning, a lot of the lessons will talk about developing your algorithms first. So it'll be maybe a chart or using the pseudocode. So there's a good example of how to do that if you're not quite sure. So another fantastic resource, and I'm asking you to have a look at this after the webinar, and you can click on the link. But these resources, Beck from CSER showed me, and I was absolutely blown away with the amount of detail and just the information to help teachers understand the aspects behind algorithms and programming, and then loops and variables and all the sorts of things that are coming up in the curriculum. It's really explained very well. So I recommend having a look at that resource at some stage. So in terms of some of the strategies they can use with algorithms, so you might have used pictures and words and arrows and verbal instructions. You might have done some sequencing, or you might find that leaving out of steps, for example, if you're making pancakes and if you leave out one of the steps, how does that affect the algorithm? You might have a couple of different algorithms and then ask students to match them to whatever the output you might be talking about. We mentioned about the technical language. In a recipe, we've got cooking instructions and measures. We want to relate them to everyday situations. You might have a flow chart as we had before, and you can provide those where students need to cut them out and put them in order. So we're trying to get some strategies where students can be scaffolded to work with that. And the lesson plans go through, I'm sort of picking up bits and pieces, but the lesson plans sort of do these strategies, or you incorporate some of these strategies. The other thing we can do is connect learning at home. So I'm not sure if you've looked at our site with the family site, but certainly I'll talk through this in a minute. But this morning I got this link, which was very fortuitous because I could add it into it. This Barefoot UK has just redone their site with some new learning together activities. And again, I think they're really well constructed. There'll obviously be some links to algorithms, but a whole range of digital technologies concepts to have a look at. I'll just show you our learning from home section, so you know what to look for and what value it might be for your teachers and well, students as well, the family groups. One of the things is we don't actually engage with the parents as such, so we're looking for the schools to do that aspect of it, but we're trying to support the school connection with the at home. So you can see here on the left-hand side, we've got some coloured squares, and that basically looks at the you know, what aspect of the digital technologies we're covering, so information systems or algorithms. There we go. So anything with the orange was dealing with the algorithms, which there'll be somewhere through there. And you can see there we've got some lessons. There's a flow chart, which basically is describing how a card game of Snap, how to do that as an algorithm. So you can make some of these connections. If you're learning binary in school, there are some home activities that you can sort of incorporate and bring in your learning from home. And again, have a bit of a look at that. I think you might find that useful. So I've given you a little bit of a snapshot there about what are some of the things on the digital technologies site, how to find some of the resources. What I'd like to do is get some insights from you that you can share. So if you've done some work on algorithms, or if you've used some of the DT Hub resources, or you can see some of the things that I've mentioned so far. If you can put that into the chat, and Daryl's going to tell me if there's any ideas coming up. So I'll leave it just a bit of time now to think about that one. So Daryl, you can let me know.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah. Martin, we had just one question from Shelley, who wasn't quite sure around how to access the hub. So I put the link to the Digital Technologies Hub. I just wonder whether it would be a good opportunity for maybe to show the splash page, the homepage,
yep.
And we didn't really see the homepage and what that looked like.
Sorry, yep. I suppose
no, that's okay.
I'm used to it every day, and I suppose when I put those links in, I'm thinking that people can just go to those pages. But while people are putting stuff in the chat, I'll go and do that. That's a good idea.
Thank you. And while that might be an idea, just to sort of let us know how many people have actually accessed the Digital Technologies Hub, or this is new to them. I've also put in the chat the CSER MOOC. CSER is from Adelaide, and they've got some brilliant resources as well.
Yep. Okay, so apologies for not showing the homepage first. Yeah, so this is where we're at, the Digital Technologies Hub, and we have teachers, school leaders and students and families as our main audience. And with our teachers, you can see there, we've got some, with the scope and sequence, we've got lesson ideas, and we've got unpacking the curriculum as two of the main areas, but you can look at the more section, and there you go, you've got a sort of link to some of those key areas that people are interested in. And there's the MOOCs that Daryl just mentioned, so it's on that page if you wanted to go and have a look at some of the MOOCs, which are basically what that is. The University of Adelaide have put together MOOCs for primary, F2, 6, and then secondary as well. They've got a new one out on cyber security, and they've also got one on AI. So really some excellent professional learning. It's all self-paced and it's pretty brilliant. So that's the teachers section. And the school leaders section. So if you are a school leader, we have this action plan, which I think you find very useful in terms of implementation. And that takes you through some steps of a whole school plan. So it's engaging with the curriculum, aligning it with the school vision, creating a whole school plan, auditing resources, so information about how to audit your capacity, so as teachers, but also your technology, and then implementing your plan. So a bit of an overview of the site, and we've got a section on students, which basically has some careers information, some tools, cyber safety, and the family section, as I mentioned, learning at home. We've got some connections to careers, which we'll talk about later. Cyber safety, which is an important aspect that parents need to know about, and general advice. So that's a little bit of an overview. So, hopefully that helps you out.
Thanks, Martin. I have a question from Ben, asking around the differences between the VIC and the Australian Digitech curriculum.
Okay, so...
and the question is, what are the main differences?
So it's a good question, and it's one we get reasonably often. And it's really just in terms of organisation. Maybe if I go into the site. So if I go into my jurisdiction page and I go into Victoria and I go into the F to 10 curriculum, and if I go into digital technologies and find it, you'll find this learning in technology is quite a good page to have a look at. So data and data collection representation, they're all collected together. And then we've got specification with algorithms, I mentioned, together with programming and problem decomposition. The digital systems is virtually similar to what we've got in terms of the Australian curriculum, and interactions and impacts, again, are similar again. So it's really just the way that the content is organised. Abstraction, however, doesn't appear in the Australian curriculum. It's part of the process, but it doesn't actually appear. You don't assess on anything to do with abstraction, but it's really, we look at that as part of the computational thinking process. So what my suggestion is, if we're talking in the Australian curriculum, we're talking about algorithms, you'll know where it fits in terms of specification of algorithms and the development of programming. And if we're talking about data in the Australian curriculum, you can see where it fits into it. So the actual outcomes are word for word pretty much the same. It's just the organisation in the Victorian curriculum. So Ben, hopefully that answers your question. Again, Nathan and Daryl are pretty well have expertise in that area as well. But, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
I think you answered it quite well. Yeah, there's very, very little difference in terms of the actual content. It's just the way the structure is. And there's a nice link Nathan has just put into the VCAR site. But also there's a question from Sarah, a comment from Sarah. The part of the CSER is they run a lending library, which I know that during the lending was suspended, and I probably think it would still be suspended to Victoria. But their lending library has got some fantastic equipment, but maybe you could bring that up. I'm not sure exactly whether they're still suspending the lending library. But
Victoria,
it's very worthwhile.
For Victoria, I'd say at the moment it's not, but I know they have started again around the other states and territories. So again, it's probably worth dropping them a line and email them, contacting them and saying, what's happening in Victoria, because I don't imagine we can't use it anyway at the moment, but it certainly is a great resource to be aware of and to access. So good points. So thanks for those comments. Shall I move on?
Yep. The lending library, there's a question about that, Javini. You actually have to contact the Adelaide people. They'll package it up.
Yep.
If it's still available to Victorians, they'll package it up, send it out to your school.
Yep. Yep.
You just have to go and pick it up from the post office or wherever they send it to. And then you just use it, and then you need to return it.
Mm.
But if you go onto the CSER website, you'll see there's an actual splash screen for the lending library as well.
Yep. Thank you. So you might have looked at some of our lessons and looked at the learning design. And the learning design, just to give you a bit of background, if you've seen on the department website a masterclass with Chris Hart and Summer Howarth. Chris Hart did the early work on the Digital Technologies Hub and helped us with the learning design. And we came up with this notion. It's based on quite a few different learning designs, but starting out with a learning hook, so enticing students into being engaged in the topic, and how do we do that? And a learning map is we're instructing it's like a learning intention, but explaining very clearly, explicitly what the learning's about. The learning outcomes are linked to our learning map, and then we've got our learning input. So it's usually the teacher providing that input, but basically, providing, if it's to do with algorithms, it's the teacher providing some sort of instruction and setting up the problem. Then in terms of learning construction, students doing a task where they're constructing their learning based on that learning input, and a learning demonstration is, again, applying that understanding a bit further and then reflecting on their learning. That's basically some of the understandings there. I've got a link to the learning design if you want to have a look at that. I think it'd be worthwhile just having a bit of a read through about that. It's quite useful. You'll notice that with our lessons, we have lessons that integrate digital technologies. So this one here, this example is with Hearth and Civics and Citizenship, but there's plenty of resources you can locate by searching on our site, and I'll probably just show you how to do that. Search the lesson plans, so you know where it is. So you can see here, I'll show you how I found that, but essentially I can filter by year level. So if it's F to 2, it'll bring me up a whole range of lessons. And you can choose to view all. If you've got year 5, 6, and you wanted some lessons to do with English, well, then throws up, so you can integrate some of those lessons. And where that is, if you look in the navigation, has lesson ideas, and you can search the lesson ideas, and there's the learning design that I mentioned before. So if you want to have a closer look at the learning design, there's some information about how that's constructed. We also have, while I'm here, might as well show you the artificial intelligence type lessons we've got. So there's quite a few lessons we've got linked to artificial intelligence. So, it's really useful to have a look at some of those lessons and look at some of the ways to look at this emerging type of technology and what does it mean for students. So in this case, we've got, how does a computer see? And it takes you through some existing real-world applications of shark spotting, weed spotting in Kakadu National Park, driverless cars. So you can use those as an example, and then it takes you through a whole range of activities to introduce artificial intelligence, and this is about computer vision. So one aspect of that, and we have some AI tools in there. Again, probably worth having a look at, you know, if you're interested in trying to incorporate some artificial intelligence. At years 9 and 10, we have a whole section on lessons to do with coding a chatbot in Python, or book analysis in AI, using AI techniques. And again, that's tutorials, really well developed process where we've got Sanjin is going through step by step how to put that together, and a whole lot of lessons combined together. So yeah, so fantastic lessons there. So let's go back. So you'll see there we've got quite a few different lessons. Hopefully you can't hear my door in the background. Just got to the door. And you also notice that we've got some inclusive education lessons. So each one of the lesson plans has some icons, and you can see there basically at different parts of the lesson explains how you might sort of adjust the lesson for students with a disability, for example. And we use this learning design. So this is a PDF of the infographic which explains some of the learning design and some examples how to cater for students with a disability. So, yeah.
So Martin, just a couple of questions that have arisen, two in particular from the one school, but around the difference between ICT and the Digitech curriculum. And Nathan has very helpfully put into the chat a link from the Digital Technologies Hub, and I think that may help there. But have you got anything that you wanted to speak to that about?
Yeah, I might just go back to that link. I'll just go through this way. So it's a good point. There's quite a few teachers looking at that. I'll just show you where we've got that information. So if you go into the Australian curriculum, and we've got ICT versus digital technologies. So it's a good point to raise, and we still get quite a bit of confusion about what the difference is. So we produced this little poster which sort of talks about the difference between each one, and you can see here one of the key differences is, so using ICT, we you know, there are types of things that are linked to, if I'm doing science or maths, and I'm using a presentation tools, or I'm locating some information for English, I'm doing some digital publishing, I'm looking at some mapping tools, but I'm basically using the ICT or digital technologies tools for a purpose. So I'm sort of trying to use that for accessing information, and whereas in digital technology we're looking at some really key concepts and creating solutions. We're looking at digital systems, how networks, we're looking at automation, we're looking at coding and programming, so producing our own digital solutions. We're incorporating computational thinking. We might be designing a game and looking at user interface and the interaction between human and the computer. We might be looking at how computers store binary information and use binary information. I mentioned the algorithms and data collection. So we're, in terms of data collection, we'd be analysing data, we're visualising the data, we're using tools to do that. So there are crossovers, and this little example here might help people. So examples of ICT might be, you know, providing a PowerPoint with a project. you're using ICT to present some information. You might be a sports teacher and you're using video to analyse students' performance. Or you might be looking at a simulation that someone else has created. Oops, go back. Using a search engine effectively, using spreadsheets, there's a bit of crossover, using something that someone else has developed, whereas now in digital technologies, we're talking about, say if you're going to make an image of that showing here, we're trying to create a code to be able to do that. So how do we code those black and white squares to come up? And that's the start of looking at binary on-off, 1 and zeros. If you're comparing a transport network and a computer network, we're looking at digital systems and looking at the protocols and the security around that. If you're creating an interactive story, so we're looking at user input, making decisions, using a programming language. So we're really creating the solutions. I think hopefully that's made sense. You can do some more reading if you like in terms of what's on there. We've got a blog on ICT and DT. Yep. James Curran's got a video on there, explains it. We've got ICT and assessment resources, and we've got a link to our ICT capabilities. If you did want to have a look at ICT tools, there's a really good, this typology basically goes through a lot of the different sorts of ICT applications and, talks about the different sorts of applications. So hopefully that gave you a little bit of a difference there, but it's a very good question, and
thanks.
Thanks for bringing that one up, because it is something that people do ask quite often.
I put the link in the chat. It's a set of digital technology versus ICT cards. You print those off. It's a nice 10, 15 minutes activity you can run at a staff meeting. Get staff to organise the cards according to what they think where they belong. So that's another activity there. Okay. So I think we're sort of moving along a little bit here, Martin, so we better keep them.
Yes. I just look at the time. It's amazing how you just run out of time, isn't it? So I'll just point to some of these things. You've got the PowerPoint, which has basically got all the links to have a look at some of these resources. But I thought I'll go to. I think it's really important to have a look at our assessment section. Just let me give you a quick look at that site, because I think, as I mentioned before, we want to look at how do we assess students. So I worked with the University of Adelaide CSER, Rebecca Vivian, on this, and it goes through the different sorts of templates. I think aloud is something, for example, if a student did an activity on programming and that you've asked to explain how their program works, this document, the Think Aloud, helps you with that. And then we use the BBC microbit as a project as an example. So if you have a look at some of these examples, it'll give you a really good basis to assess your students. There's rubrics. Would have been nice to go through some of these, but the other thing I wanted to show you was in the unpacking assessment or planning for assessment. So basically it just takes you through, what's the process to assess digital technologies, unpacking the assessment. But I just want to draw your attention to this part on Bloom's taxonomy, because I found it really interesting to look at what are some of the active verbs in our curriculum. So, for example, to design and to create, to implement, those words that are part of our the content descriptors, basically can help you work out what type of assessment. So if you go to this section here, it basically comes up and says, let's say, for example, if they are creating, so what's the definition of that? But the active verbs in the curriculum are to share, to implement, to manage, and these are all higher order thinking skills. and then it provides you with some activities, some assessment type activities, and some information about that. But I certainly would direct you to have a look at some of the assessment section there. We've got lots of examples, and you could use some of our examples to help you with your assessment. So again, in the PowerPoint, it's basically got, or the slide deck, it's got some plenty of information. What I did want to talk about before we finished at the end was to think about how remote and flexible learning impacts the way we're doing things at the moment. But we can do things like algorithms at home, recipes, and making sandwiches, and all sorts of things that we can incorporate with our students. I've given you a link here about some modifications you might do to some teaching practices. I found it really useful as that bit of information. And we've also got some lesson variation. So if you did do a variation of some of the lessons that are in the digital technologies, sometimes I incorporate, if someone sends me their variation, I incorporate that back into the lesson. So in this one here, using binary to create on-off pictures, a teacher had a blog of how he adapted it, and it's part of the lesson now, which teachers are finding quite useful as another variation. So, sorry, I think we're running out of time. Hopefully I did some of that. I've probably open up for some questions if we've got some more questions, Daryl, or some comments.
Thanks, Martin. Yeah, we did have one question from Ben. Ben was wondering whether the Digitech Hub included any information on design and tech. I think, Ben, we may have answered that in the chat, but
yeah,
we did say that they do have some things in common, that the Hub mainly deals with digital technology.
There might be some connections with some STEM activities that we do have on there, but it's not part of our remit to do that, the design technology. So I think what I'm hoping is that you can take the slide deck away. You can go through and look at some of the things that might be of interest. It's amazing how fast 45 minutes goes when you're trying to show some really good resources. So hopefully you got a little bit of a taste and you can see where to go, and you can see the benefits of that.
Martin, it's Kevin Daly. I'm the manager at DLTV. I'd just like to thank you for your excellent presentation. There's a hell of a lot of work in that, so I'm hoping you can reuse that slide deck. So, but yeah, that was really good, Martin. Thank you.
Well, as I said, I'm hoping that teachers can go and have a look at some of the other resources I didn't get a chance to show.
It has got so much to look at, and it's just a fantastic resource for people to have a sit back, have a good look at, share with your staff. There's some fantastic computer-free activities as well. So if you look through, you'll find some fantastic activities to do with your kids who don't necessarily need to have a computer. Can do lots of hands-free
plenty
activities.
of unplugged resources. Well, thanks for the opportunity to share some of the work.
Everyone, we'll hang around for a few more minutes if people have got more questions. Happy to hang about for a while, but in terms of the actual presentation, thanks so much again, Martin, much appreciated. And I've got to say, it's my go-to place. I love the Digitech Hub.
Excellent.
And not only because of it's got great resources, but it's got some of our teachers in some of the pictures. And one of the really good things is looking at some of the school stories as well. Some of the school stories are fantastic. The case studies that you've got as well.
Yeah. So I welcome people to.
But still, we'll keep an eye on the chat.
Yeah.
Lots of people signing out and saying
careers,
thanks so much. Much appreciated.
Thank
you.
Fantastic. Section, I think it's really worth having a look at as well.
Absolutely.